The 15th of January 1943. Central Solomon Sea. Night pressed down like a physical weight over the convoy, a chain of cargo ships churning through black water that smelled of oil and warm metal. Their wakes glowed faintly under the tropical moon, forming pale streaks behind the hulls. Above them, the sky trembled with distant thunder that was not weather but the low, continuous heartbeat of engines, American escorts scanning the void for shapes that should not be there. Aboard a P-38 Lightning circling the convoy's perimeter, condensation clung to the canopy and quivered each time the twin Allison engines pulsed. Lieutenant Avery Hale kept his gloved hands tight on the controls, eyes cutting from the horizon to the wavering green line of the radar repeater mounted near his knee. The cockpit smelled of sweat, fuel vapor, and the faint electrical bite of heated wires. Every instrument glowed dim red, barely piercing the gloom that pressed in against the glass. The convoy below was crawling through one of the most hunted stretches of ocean in the Pacific, and everyone in the air knew the same truth. Japanese G4M Betty bombers could appear with no warning, sliding out of cloud cover like blades. They carried torpedoes that could shatter a ship in a single blow. And they were fast, too fast, thin-winged killers whose fuel tanks turned them into flying lanterns but gave them frightening reach. Hale listened to the murmur of static in his headset, the soft rhythmic sweep of the shipborne radar beneath him. The night seemed frozen, the world reduced to the shudder of the aircraft and the metallic groan of the convoy's engines echoing faintly upward. The tension was constant, coiled, stretching every second like wire pulled past its limit. They had already lost one freighter 2 nights earlier, swallowed by fire and sea before the escorts even found a target to shoot at. Something unseen had stalked them, struck, and slipped back into the dark. Tonight felt the same. A thin tremor whispered across the radar trace. Hale leaned closer, breath fogging the glass. The signal blinked, faint, uncertain, dancing in a way that suggested motion rather than noise. He tightened his straps, heart tapping slow and heavy. Another tremor. Then a third. Far off, thunder deepened. At first it might have been weather. But no weather approached in a narrowing cone. No weather moved with the cold precision of aircraft closing distance without revealing their silhouette. A quiet radio pulse cracked through his headset. Convoy radar picking up possible inbound group. Bearing 210. Faint. High. Hale's eyes cut to the dark smear of sky in that direction. Nothing. No stars eclipsed. No shadows moving against the deeper shadows behind them. But the air felt heavier now, like static gathering before a lightning strike. He pushed the throttles forward until the cockpit rattled. The Lightning surged ahead, slicing through humid darkness. Below him, waves flashed momentarily as the moon broke from thin clouds, then hid again, plunging everything back into blackness. Another contact flickered on the radar and vanished. Another appeared, held for 2 seconds, then slipped away as if melting back into the sea. It made no sense. G4MS were large. They showed up clean on radar in most conditions. But these signatures were weak, inconsistent, almost ghost-like. Either they were jamming, or they were flying lower than expected, hugging the sea so tightly that radar struggled to distinguish metal from water. Hale steadied his breathing. The Lightning's turbines whined higher. The airframe vibrated with growing urgency. A metallic click echoed through his headset, one of the destroyers below switching to full alert. Search crews scrambled to stations, footsteps hammering steel decks, ammunition rattling in crates, turret motors humming as they swung toward the unknown. Moonlight leaked through the clouds again, and in that brief sliver of silver illumination Hale's eyes caught something, maybe nothing. A line. A shape. A reflection of something moving impossibly low, parallel with the water. Then darkness swallowed it. A sudden burst of radio static jolted him. Possible visual. Bearing 205. Very low. Multiple. Hale banked hard, body slamming into the harness. The Lightning tilted until ocean filled the canopy, a black sheet flecked with faint bioluminescent tremors. He leveled just above stall speed, scanning the surface as though the G4MS might erupt upward at any moment. But the sea remained still. Then, emerging from the gloom like shadows gaining weight, the convoy's portside destroyer fired a single-star shell. Its ascent was slow, hissing, painting an arc above the fleet before bursting into a harsh, white glare. In that moment the sea changed. Shapes appeared, thin, sleek, slicing forward in perfect formation. 3. Then 6. Then more. Japanese G4MS, but lower than any pilot expected. Their bellies were nearly touching the waves, engines throwing up ribbons of spray. Their silhouettes were stretched and distorted by the glare, turning them into phantom constructs of smoke and metal. Yet as soon as the light exposed them, they seemed to recoil back into darkness. Not diving. Not climbing. Almost dissolving into the night. The star shell flickered out. Darkness reclaimed everything. Hale blinked against after images as his aircraft plunged forward into the void. He pushed the throttle to the stops. The lightning trembled with strain as he climbed just enough to avoid stalling. But when the next radar sweep passed over the sea below, there was nothing. No echoes. No traces. The G4MS had vanished. He stared into the blackness, jaw tightening, the silence inside the cockpit expanding until it felt like a living thing. The night had taken them. Or something worse, something he didn't yet understand. Below him, the convoy's engines roared anxiously. Above him, the sky felt suddenly enormous and empty. The sensation was unmistakable. The attack wasn't over. It hadn't even begun. The sky felt hollow, too wide, too silent, like something massive had slipped between layers of darkness and was now circling unseen. The starshell's glare had burned a temporary scar across the night, but now only black water and drifting smoke remained. The destroyers below maintained their course, though their engines rumbled with a nervous, uneven rhythm, as if the steel itself sensed what human eyes could not find. Lieutenant Hale kept the P-38 low, slicing just above the wave tops. The Lightning's propellers churned humid air into vibrating ribbons, and each vibration felt like it might shatter the fragile silence that had fallen over the convoy. The radar repeater blinked its persistent green sweep, but the screen betrayed nothing. No blips, no drift, no pulse of engine noise bouncing through the void. It was impossible. G4M formations didn't evaporate. They struck fast, violent, and obvious. Yet the group he glimpsed seemed to melt back into the sea as if the ocean had consumed them willingly. A quiet radio tremor filled his ears. Convoy 1 to air cover, negative contacts, all ships holding fire, maintain scan. The voice sounded strained, the low thrum of destroyer turbines hanging behind it like distant thunder. Hale felt sweat forming along his spine despite the high-altitude chill seeping through the cockpit. He banked left, crossing the convoy's bow. The sea looked almost oily, perfectly smooth except for the wakes, reflecting faint glimmers of starlight. It was a false calm, the type that preceded sudden violence. Far ahead, faint lightning flickered inside a developing storm wall, illuminating clouds like ghostly battlements. The G4MS could be hiding within that darkness, using the storm to mask altitude and bearing. Or they could be attacking from the moon's blind side. Hale scanned the sky again, every muscle in his neck taut. A faint radar spike appeared, 1 pixel, then gone. Hale blinked hard. Another spike. Then nothing. He checked the cables beneath the instrument panel, everything was secure. The shipborne radar operator chimed in, his voice barely more than a whisper of static. Unconfirmed return at bearing 220, possibly low, possibly climbing. The hesitation carried weight. They'd expected the G4MS to approach like predators. Instead, the Japanese formation behaved like something studying its prey from a different dimension of the night. Below, one of the destroyers fired a short burst from its 20mm mounts into empty space, tracer arcs dissolving into the wind. Another ship followed with a single probing shell. The echoes thundered across the sea, then faded. Nothing moved. No silhouette broke the horizon. The water swallowed the sound and gave back only silence. Hale throttled up, climbing until the Lightning's engines wailed. The airframe shuddered as he punched through a layer of haze. From this altitude, the convoy was a faint set of shapes, glowing dots, exhaust smears, drifting smoke. He expected the G4MS to reveal themselves now, diving from above or sweeping broadside with their torpedoes ready. But the sky remained sterile, a dark sphere pressing inward without releasing its secrets. Another spike. Stronger this time. Hale leaned forward, heart hammering. 5 faint returns appeared, then multiplied. 9. 11. Then the entire cluster vanished as if wiped clean by an invisible hand. That was no malfunction. His right engine hummed at a slightly uneven pitch, a subtle tremor he might have ignored on any other night. Now it deepened his unease. He tapped the fuel gauge. Everything held steady. The Lightning was fine. He was the one feeling the strain. A soft, broken transmission cracked through the static. Contact, low, south of convoy. There, the transmission dissolved in interference, swallowed by some atmospheric disruption or deliberate jamming. Hale pushed the Lightning into a shallow dive. His canopy glass trembled with moisture as he dropped through thin cloud layers. The sea returned beneath him, a vast, pulsing void. He scanned left. Scanned right. Nothing. Then he noticed something odd in the water. Wakes, long, perfectly parallel wakes, moving fast, too fast for surface craft, weaving in coordinated patterns just below the moonlit sheen. At first they resembled torpedoes, but they were too broad, too smooth, as if the water itself were reacting to disturbances overhead rather than beneath. Shadow wakes. Aircraft wakes. The G4MS were flying just feet above the water, tighter and lower than any training manual even acknowledged as possible. Their engines blended with the sea's background noise. Their silhouettes merged with wave shadows. And radar, bouncing low, lost them in the clutter of reflections. They had turned the ocean into camouflage. Hale's pulse kicked. He banked sharply, dropping lower. The Lightning's wingtips sliced humid air, trailing thin vapor streams. He squinted, searching for the shapes causing the phantom wakes. There, just ahead, two faint distortion lines rippling across the surface as if an invisible knife were skimming the water's skin. He accelerated, closing fast. A sudden burst of moonlight cut through the clouds, and a G4M materialized directly in his path, rising from darkness like a ghost climbing through its own reflection. Its engine screamed. Its fuselage glinted silver. Torpedo doors hung open beneath its belly. Hale jerked the Lightning upward, canopy rattling as black water rushed past beneath him. The G4M skimmed by so close he felt its turbulence slam his airframe. Then more shapes rose, 5, 6, an entire wing lifting from the sea in a coordinated, fluid motion, like predators breaking the surface after stalking their prey. They climbed toward the convoy in silence, torpedoes armed, formation perfect. The attack had begun. But something was wrong. Radar still showed nothing. No returns. No signatures. To the instruments, the G4MS did not exist. And Hale, heart pounding, engine screaming in the dark, realized the truth. Whatever these bombers were doing, whatever technique they had mastered tonight, it would not be found in any Allied briefings. They were coming out of nowhere. And if he didn't stop them, the convoy would be erased in minutes. The moon vanished behind a dense wall of cloud as the Japanese formation surged upward in perfect cohesion, a dark mass rising from the sea as if born from the water itself. Their engines, faint only moments before, now roared in unison, a deep, vibrating thunder that rolled across the convoy. It was the sound of inevitability, of precision, of a strike executed with cold discipline. And it was already too late for subtlety. Hale shoved the throttles to full military power. The Lightning lunged forward, its twin booms trembling with strain as its propellers ripped at the humid air. Wind howled around the canopy, turning the cockpit into a vibrating cage of metal and glass. Hale felt the G-forces grip his chest as he pitched up, climbing to intercept before the bombers gained optimal release range. The first G4MS, now visible as thin, predatory silhouettes, leveled out just above the wave tops. Doors opened beneath their bellies. Torpedoes slid forward, held on rails, ready to drop into the sea like fangs descending from the jaw of a hunting animal. Spray from the bomber slipstreams geysered behind them, each plume glistening under the fleeting ghost light that bled through the clouds. Below, the convoy erupted into frantic motion. Destroyers wheeled violently, turning hulls through churning water, their screws groaning as they tore against the sea. Turrets cranked, motors whining, barrels rising and tracking the incoming shapes. Voices barked orders, distant, muffled, swallowed by storm wind. Searchlights snapped on, cutting lances of white fire through the night, briefly exposing metal wings, twin tails, glinting rivets. Then the bombers split. Half the formation banked right, half left. A maneuver designed to fracture the convoy's response, divide its firepower, and force the escorts to choose between threats they could not fully counter. Hale had seconds to act. He dove. The P-38 dropped like a blade, wind screaming across its nose. Tracers streaked upward from the destroyers, orange comets ripping through black air, intercepting nothing. The G4MS stayed low, weaving with unnatural smoothness, their angles calculated with mathematical precision. One bomber released its torpedo, the weapon flashed silver before vanishing into the sea. Another followed. And another. White wakes formed behind them, deadly, straight, purposeful lines slicing toward the ships. Hale lined up the first bomber in his gun sight. He fired. 4.50 caliber guns hammered forward, the recoil shaking the Lightning so hard it felt like the entire aircraft had clenched. Streams of fire shot across the darkness, reaching the G4M's left wing. Sparks flew. Metal shards spiraled away. Smoke began to coil from the engine cowling. But the bomber didn't break formation. It didn't climb. It didn't bank. It simply continued onward, dragging a tail of burning fuel behind it like a comet, holding steady toward the convoy. The discipline chilled Hale far more than any evasive maneuver would have. He fired again. The bomber's left engine tore apart, flames billowing in a rolling blossom. The fuselage twisted, buckled, and finally crumpled, plunging into the sea in a violent geyser of white foam. But the others did not flinch. Another torpedo splashed. Another bomber rose slightly, just enough to clear its own slipstream, then dropped its weapon. Hale tore past the group, climbing steeply, lungs tight, heart pounding. The Lightning shuddered as he rolled inverted, lining up a new target. Below, the destroyers opened up with full broadsides. Tracer webs crossed the sea in brilliant arcs. Explosions peppered the water, geysers rising where shells landed just shy of their targets. One G4M took a direct hit to its tail. The entire aft section disintegrated, flaring outward like glowing embers blown from a dying fire. The bomber spun downward, trailing fragments of burning metal like falling stars. But the remaining aircraft closed to release range. And the torpedoes were already in the water. Hale zeroed in on another bomber. This one climbed higher than the rest, perhaps the formation leader. He pushed the Lightning's dive angle until the altimeter wound down too quickly for comfort. His engines howled. He could feel the airframe complaining, bolts rattling, skin panels flexing. He fired a sustained burst. Round slammed into the G4M's right wing root and cockpit frame. Glass shattered. Smoke geysered backward in long, violent streams. But once again, the bomber held course, refusing to break discipline. Hale fired again, this time walking the tracers along the fuselage until the central fuel tank ruptured. The explosion was instantaneous, a balloon of fire expanding outward, consuming the aircraft in a searing bloom of orange and white. Pieces rained downward, sizzling as they hit the water. The remaining G4Ms began their escape route, climbing southward in a steep arc. They had delivered their blow. They had no reason to remain. But something changed, something Hale felt before he understood. The torpedo wakes had vanished. He blinked hard, scanning the surface. White lines should have been cutting through the sea, unstoppable trajectories heading for the convoy's hulls. But the wakes were gone, as if the torpedoes had never entered the water at all. He rolled lower, squinting through the mist. Nothing. He checked again. Still nothing. No wakes. No impacts. No detonations. No sound of steel meeting steel. Every torpedo had disappeared. Not missed. Not malfunctioned. Disappeared. The destroyers below continued evasive maneuvers, unaware that the danger seemed to have dissolved. Hale's heart thudded unevenly. He scanned the sea with mounting disbelief. Behind him, the surviving G4Ms climbed steadily toward the cloud wall, engines droning like a fading choir. One by one, their silhouettes merged with the darkness, thinning, dissolving, becoming formless. Radar still showed 0 contacts. No returns. No trace of their climb out. It was as though the bombers were slipping into a different layer of the night, a place where machines did not register, where wakes did not form, where even torpedoes left no mark upon the sea. Hale steadied the Lightning and watched the last bomber fade into the cloud bank. Then even the engine noise died. And the entire sky went silent. The attack had happened. The damage should have been catastrophic. But the sea remained still. No fires. No sinking hulls. No debris. The G4M strike had executed flawlessly, then left no evidence of its impact. Something was fundamentally wrong. Something beyond tactics. Beyond engineering. Something Hale could not yet name. But as he circled the convoy, his breathing slow and tight, one thought began to form with chilling clarity. Whatever had just occurred, it was not over. The storm front swallowed the last of the Japanese bombers as if the night itself were closing a door. Their engine noise, once a roaring, unified force, dwindled until only the pulse of Hale's own twin Allisons remained, humming like restrained electricity in a world suddenly emptied of motion. He banked gently above the convoy, scanning for damage he expected to see, fires blooming from ruptured decks, listing hulls bleeding oil into the waves, frantic searchlights demanding help. But the sea below lay undisturbed. Destroyers carved their nervous arcs through calm black water, exhaust stacks breathing slow, uncertain pulses of smoke. Cargo vessels maintained formation, crews visible on dimly lit decks as clusters of silhouettes frozen in disbelief. No flames flickered. No sirens wailed. No metal groaned with mortal wounds. Something in the air felt wrong, not in a tactical sense but in a way that pressed into the subconscious, like stepping into a room where an argument had just occurred but seeing only silence, objects untouched, the tension clinging to the walls like invisible dust. Hale descended. The lightning cut through low mist. Every instinct he possessed rebelled against the idea that dozens of torpedoes had simply ceased to exist. Torpedoes did not vanish. Wakes did not evaporate mid-run. The sea did not erase evidence of violence. Yet that was exactly what it looked like, an attack conducted flawlessly and then swallowed whole. A static-laced transmission cracked into his headset, brittle as tearing paper. Air cover, report, status, convoy intact, no impacts recorded. The voice trembled, not with fear but confusion, as if the speaker were trying to explain a dream using the language of reality. Hale keyed his MIC briefly, offering only a clipped acknowledgement. It was the only thing he could articulate with certainty. He circled again and again, tracing widening spirals over the formation. Beneath him, the destroyers sent sailors to the rails to peer across the water, searching for torpedo tracks that should have been visible. Some pointed. Others argued. One crew angling a searchlight along the port bow saw nothing but gentle wave ridges illuminated in pale white arcs. Hale climbed into a thinning layer of cloud. The storm front ahead flickered with distant lightning, its illumination breathing in slow pulses like the dimming of a colossal lantern. He angled east to follow the bomber's escape path. If he could locate even one damaged G4M, one trail of smoke, a drifting wreck, a piece of floating debris, he could anchor himself back into the world of logic. But the sky ahead was empty. Not empty like an unpatrolled horizon, empty in a way that suggested something had passed through and taken the air with it. He advanced anyway, the lightning's engine heat washing his legs as he pushed into the storm's perimeter. Rain hammered the canopy in irregular bursts. Turbulence pressed his shoulders into the harness. At the edge of visibility, he thought he saw something, a smear of black crossing the clouds at impossible speed. His pulse quickened. He adjusted course. The smear dissolved. Thunder rolled across the sky, long and hollow. He angled back toward the convoy, but not before taking one last look into the storm. Nothing moved. No metal glinted. No silhouettes clung to the cloud bank. The G4MS had vanished as completely as their torpedoes. By the time Hale returned to escort altitude, the convoy's ships had steadied. Engines idled at a reduced pitch. Turrets rotated back to neutral. The sudden calm felt unnatural, like walking out of a burning building to find the world cool and silent. One of the destroyers signaled for Hale to orbit low. The request itself was routine. Their tone was not. He descended and began a tight, disciplined circle a few hundred feet above the lead vessel. Sailors on deck looked upward as though expecting him to carry an answer they lacked the words to ask. He had none. A faint glimmer on the water drew his attention, something small drifting on the surface. He dipped lower. At first he thought it was debris, maybe wood or metal. But its edges were too smooth. Too regular. It was a bubble. A small pocket of shimmering air held within a skin of water, rising slowly, then popping silently as though exhaling. Another appeared. Then another. 3 in total. Then none. No wreckage. No oil slick. No foam from impacts. Just those bubbles. Hale climbed again, discomfort coiling deep within his chest. The night swallowed anomalies like that without explanation, leaving the mind to fumble in the dark. The radio crackled again. Convoy continuing course. Air cover resume standard pattern. The words carried the unspoken message: we do not know what happened. We do not understand it. But we will pretend this night fits within our war. Hale returned to altitude, flying parallel to the convoy's starboard side. The sea stretched endlessly, a polished void broken only by the rhythmic swell of waves and the muted glow of ship lights. As minutes passed, the adrenaline drained from his system, leaving a hollow ache where certainty should have been. His breath fogged the canopy. The engines hummed their steady, dependable song. Everything normal. Everything unchanged. Except the absence. No torpedoes. No damage. No remains. No radar returns. No explanation. The G4MS had executed an attack run with precision, discipline, and flawless timing, then vanished without leaving a trace of their weapons, their losses, or their own retreat. The war produced mysteries, accidents, weather distortions, radar failures. But this felt different. Hale sensed it deep, persistent, unshakable. Something had happened in the Blackwater, something silent, controlled, intentional. The convoy continued on until dawn, unscathed. Hale landed hours later on a rain-slick runway, the P-38 rolling to a shuddering stop as ground crews jogged toward him. They expected reports, diagrams, bearings, damage assessments. Instead, they found a pilot stepping down from his aircraft with the expression of someone who had seen an event but didn't know the name for it. He gave his debrief. Calm, precise, professional. He told them about the formation, the accuracy, the torpedo drops, the vanishing wakes. They recorded every word. Then he told them the torpedoes never struck, never surfaced, never left a trail, never produced a sound. Silence filled the room. The report would be archived, analyzed, dismissed by some, filed away by others. A curiosity buried in the endless paper corridors of the Pacific War. But those present, the ones who heard Hale's voice, saw the pallor in his eyes, never forgot. Some attacks destroy fleets. Some disappear into the sea. And some, like this one, remain permanently suspended between those two truths, unresolved, inexplicable, lingering in memory like a ripple that refuses to fade. Long after the war ended, the story remained. A night when death approached from the horizon, and then left without leaving a mark.